Howdy, folks, and welcome to your storm chasing forecast show for Tuesday, July 21st. I am Gabriel Harbor, and he is Cameron Nixon, coming hot off the heels.
Hmm.
Excellent prediction from yesterday's storm chasing forecast show. Cameron, how you doing today?
Thank you, Gabe. I'm good. Yeah, like I was telling Gabe earlier, I gave myself a little pat on the back for yesterday's forecast, and so I'm hoping today's goes just as good.
You know what? I'm thinking that it will. I'm feeling pretty good. There's a risk area in my hometown, which means even
Yeah,
if I plan on not storm chasing, the storms might chase me. So I'm hoping that I'll get a chance to hop in my vehicle, drive 5 minutes down the road, and at least get to see something cool rolling in today. That's kind of my
indeed.
upside, my high end ceiling.
Yes, Gabe's celebrity shot today.
I'll be one of those Midwest dads that always stays upstairs
Yes,
way too long when the tornado is bearing down on you. And
that's
then
all I do.
my favorite is the inevitable. The phone's being held up until the last second, and then you just hear things start to break and fly around in the
Yeah,
background, and you hear, "Oh crap!" And then the phone
yeah.
just goes black, and you just hear a bunch of noise. And
It is really disconcerting how many of those videos we're getting now.
yeah, yeah, it is. But enough about the Midwestern dads. Let's talk a little bit about today's setup. You've got the SPC Outlook pulled up in front of you, and I know you mentioned a couple of targets that have caught your eye. One of them, mine as
Yeah.
well. So tell people what they should be expecting here in this forecast show.
Yeah, absolutely. And like yesterday, and like always, like Storm Prediction Center, it's their job to issue much larger risks where the potential could happen across this entire risk area. As storm spotters, though, and even enthusiasts, I think there's going to be two more consolidated areas of supercell and tornado potential. One of them being here south of Louisville, Kentucky, maybe to Lexington, which train does get actually decent over here, so would not be surprised to see some spotters around this area. Then another around the DC area. So if you're a DC chaser, definitely be on the lookout. But of course, we have potential for storms all across this area and see what that looks like. So far, we have a large 5% unhashed. I would not be surprised to see a hashed area added later on over parts of Kentucky. I definitely think the environmental parameter space could support that later on. So we'll look at our upper level flow. And we have this kind of remnant, really quick jet stream from yesterday. That's going to make its way down into the mid Atlantic, lower Midwest here throughout the day and gradually weaken just a little bit over time. So that's one thing to watch where we don't have that kind of strengthening or punching jet that we had yesterday, but we do have some pretty fast translation speeds into this area. Go a little bit lower, and we again are still dealing with that same trough. Maybe some messiness in the flow pattern. You could see there's a couple little short waves around here. This is what's going to be kind of the hardest part of this forecast is understanding how all of this is going to evolve, especially how our morning convection is going to evolve. And so I think I should probably go on the record and say that most of these are being recorded, or at least this one's being recorded the night before. And I honestly have very little idea this time around how morning convection is going to evolve over here. This is really going to be a chaotic evolution. And so it's really going to matter where those morning storms come through. So we can take a look at how the and the NAM are resolving our situation this morning, generally depicting kind of widespread convection from Ohio up into the Northeast. So it would only make sense then that this area, kind of especially Pennsylvania, New York, might be a little bit more uncertain as we kind of deal with the remnants of this convection. If we look at NAM Nest, similar story, maybe even extending a little bit farther south. So this is kind of why these couple areas stood out to me. The DC area being well ahead of this kind of mid-level wave here, and the Kentucky area being far enough south that these storms eventually decay and then maybe rebuild later on through that area. But we'll go step by step and we'll look at just generally what we're dealing with at the surface, other than that kind of strong mid-level wave. And we just have this long, broad pressure trough. Tell me if you've heard this one before. I feel like all these past events have featured something like this kind of northwest flow pressure trough here. So we'll definitely have some surface forcing for storms. You see the surface pattern, especially over the Appalachian region, and just instability up here is just lacking. We don't really have very high surface temps here. A symptom of this, most of this area being covered by mottled convection here in the midday. So definitely not great for chasing prospects here, but you do see a couple areas, right? This area up into Kentucky here, southern Indiana, southern Ohio, and then another one up into the DC area. And if we look at dew points, we can scroll out to later on today, and you see a similar thing. We have these two kind of moisture axes here that are going to be our main players. So maybe we can look at the HRRR just because it has probably a better resolution of low-level surface features, or at least what it thinks, where it thinks they might be. And we could start examining more closely the environment. And so we'll pluck some settings around noon, 1 o'clock, a little bit later up in the Northeast since we're ahead an hour. And I think this is the biggest kind of red flag is, and I've plucked several soundings across Pennsylvania, New York. They're very saturated, very deep, full column saturation. That's going to give you a lot of healthy stratiform range shields and a lot of sapped buoyancy up this way. If you go a little bit farther south, though, toward the DC metro, might see a little bit different of a story, just a little bit more dry air throughout that column. HRRR, not super enthusiastic on shear profiles. We're definitely going to look at NAMs too, because as is typical, the NAM likes to have a little bit stronger low-level shear. But I think where HRRR is going to at least favor a little bit more is this area here after sensibly storms move off and recover, and then we have the secondary kind of initiation of storms as that cold front comes in. You see we squeeze our Cape axis here, and then we start getting these little convective signals here. So if we pluck a sounding just south of Louisville, we get a little bit better photographs here, some nice strong cloud layer shear, and then actually some pretty strong surface to 500 millibar or 500 meter shear. So definitely would not put this past it to be kind of a tornadic environment. Do have a lot of moisture here in the low levels, so I think one of the biggest failure modes for this setup down south is just being a lot of convection initiation. But similar to yesterday, we have extreme low-level Cape here, upwards of 200, 250, depending on what parcel you use. So definitely an easy tornado kind of setup with all that low-level stretching. And we can take a look at RAP and check out our low-level wind fields to see if they're expected to strengthen throughout the day. And let's do 850. And really not a whole lot of strengthening throughout the day. We're just hoping on this low-level wave to stride through. Maybe some increase in speeds, though, into the DC area, which might kind of be interesting. That might suggest that if we hold off convection until later, things might get slightly more interesting. So let me look at NAM. NAM might have a little bit more optimism for our shear profile. And we could definitely see that over Kentucky. We have much stronger speeds in that kind of maximum here. And we can throw up something like Cape here to give us an idea of where to target. First, we could check out the kind of Washington, D.C. area. Once again, little decent photographs, maybe not really that would, I guess, be too supportive of tornadoes. A lot of icky kind of mid-level moisture here, but a lot of Cape in general. Kind of reminds me of a couple days before where we were mainly a multi-cell and windbag kind of threat here, especially with this kind of sounding here. You got these inverted Vs. So would not be surprised to see a few supercell structures, but also kind of more pulse multi-cell kind of convection here. But as you go westward, I'll maybe pluck a few soundings throughout Kentucky. Probably going to get some much better shear profiles. Look at that. That's definitely not bad. Beautiful thermo profiles too. Very shallow moisture with lots of low-level Cape here. Maybe if we go out further west, we could even get a little bit more low-level Cape out of this. Yeah, look at, wow, jeez. And again, really nice cloud-bearing shear and some strong low-level shear to boot. So would not be surprised to see several supercells from Kentucky up into Ohio, out into West Virginia from this later wave initiating off that cold front. I definitely think these might start out as more mini supercells, kind of like they were yesterday. Up in Wisconsin, we have those low LCLs, lots of low-level Cape. That tends to give you very small updrafts that are just rapidly stretched up, can produce some small but photogenic and even strong tornadoes. And we have a very similar shear profile as we did across Wisconsin yesterday.
Before we go any further, I want to let all of you know about an amazing opportunity that we are offering right now. There is a storm chasing tour for 2027 in the description below. You click that link, you're going to learn more information. Most important part, though, is check out that price tag. You will not find a better price in the industry for a storm chasing tour. And again, that is 7 full days of storm chasing, hotels paid for, ride and fuel paid for. It's going to be a great time. If that sounds interesting to you, check it out in the description below. Cameron, you also said
Sure.
one other interesting thing. You said that there might be a lot of cloud cover as the failure mode, and I just want to go on the record and say that if you're in Ohio and the skies aren't gray, nothing's going to happen. That's
Yeah.
that's the way it rolls out here, man. Like you know how in I think it was the Dark Knight Rises movie where Bane is talking to Batman and he says, "I was born in the dark. I was molded. I was born under the stratiform deck. I was
Yes.
molded by
Yeah.
it." I didn't see a clear warm sector until I was a young man, and by then it was nothing to me but blinding.
As a fellow child of the corn from Illinois, I know that story all too well. So I should know this.
I noticed when I was looking at the SPC outlook that they talked about the cold front sagging southward a little bit in more of that southern southwestern target area we were talking about could
Sure.
give us the benefit of shear vectors that are more orthogonal to the boundary. Do you think that could also play a part in uptrending that part of the setup so that we might get supercellular storms for longer before things go linear?
Yeah, definitely. You're totally right. I think that this front is definitely going to be very orthogonal to those shear vectors. If you kind of trace this out here, we could look at theta E, and again, we got that very gradual kind of decrease in theta E behind the front. These are good cold fronts, very long, expansive front, kind of oriented like this. And then if we throw up our wind shear, that's going to be almost perpendicular to this front, especially as we get into Kentucky. So really, I definitely don't want to say similar situation as yesterday. I think there's going to be a lot more convection to the point of there potentially being too much. But I think the forcing mechanism could be vaguely similar with initially a bunch of discrete supercells laced around that front here.
All right, folks, drum roll, please. Cam versus Cam's time. I think this is quickly becoming the fan favorite. I'll probably have to mock up some sort of like little intro graphic where the screen explodes and there's like you head to head against the Nam Nest.
It might be time for that. It honestly might be time for that. Yeah, we'll have to do the NamNest because that'll be a vintage model. But yeah, so I think the biggest question mark today is going to be how things evolve up north. Really not holding out a lot of hope for Pennsylvania and north for chasing prospects. However, definitely could see some spiciness down south. As we kind of mentioned earlier, there does seem to be a couple areas, one further along that cold front, and then another one east of all this mess in the lee of the Appalachians here. We do see some supercell and then multi-cell activity over the kind of DC area up to Harrisburg. And then as we go west along that cold front, we see potentially multiple rounds. I don't exactly know what is triggering this first one, maybe a cold front aloft before we get down to the surface. But NAM's showing potentially multiple rounds of these supercells, and many of them. So quite an interesting kind of setup, maybe supercells lasting all the way down to Nashville and Jackson, if we kind of believe this scenario here. Her, again, early on has lots of convection up here, and then starts to initiate more blobby stuff over kind of Washington, D.C. And again, I feel like I've got kind of tunnel vision for tornadic supercells. This is not to say that there couldn't be supercells anywhere across this risk area. They might just be more of kind of a hail and wind threat, but we definitely expect with all this remnant activity, just there to be outflow boundaries everywhere. And again, we saw how saturated the environment was and how much CAPE there was across this area. I definitely think there's just a possibility of that kind of whack-a-mole convection pretty much over that entire risk area. But when it comes to more organized, long-lived supercells and tornado potential, I think the HRRR is a pretty good look for kind of northern Kentucky, which is pretty much exactly where we've been targeting here, just around Lexington. You see a couple discrete storms before they congeal into multiple supercells. I guess I'm really curious to see how that congealing happens. I've definitely seen quite a bit of moisture in these soundings, so I would not be surprised if things congeal. A sounding like this would definitely support more upscale growth maybe some wind potential with that inverted V. But it's also possible to get more moisture near the ground, maybe a little bit more drier aloft, and then we can sustain some of these discrete storms for longer. I'm not even going to look at the RFS because I know what it's going to say.
I was actually so excited to see what the output was. I can't believe you're going to deny me like that.
Fine. Oh my God. We're not going back. We're not doing that. Yeah, honestly, fairly similar to the HRRR, though, interestingly enough. Maybe a little bit more shy on the convection up north, though. Oh God, do I do? Yeah, no, can't do that again.
That's like the line segment from hell right there. Holy
No,
smokes.
it is. It is. That's just nutty.
That's like a Slim Jim. It's like a giant stick of beef jerky just about to rake the entire Appalachian Mountains area over the coals. Yeah.
On that note, I think we should finish.
All right, before we finish up, I do want to remind folks the awesome tool that Cameron's been using on the screen share is the WeatherFront browser app, roughly synonymous with the desktop app, which is also available. And if you haven't already been using the WeatherFront app on your mobile device, that of course is available too. Link in the description for all that. It's an amazing tool.
Good night.
Like how you're just zooming in on the.
Good night, dude.
Remember to check out those links in the description below, and then watch another video.